Hello, welcome back. I'm Eric Kane. Allow me to be a tad bit controversial today. I try not to be too controversial. Well, I don't really try. I don't personally think that my opinions are controversial. I'm not setting out here to stir the pot or enrage people or be a provocateur. I am trying to say what I think is reasonable, and that's because I think I am a reasonable person. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I am actually, as some people have accused me, a radical alt-right psychopath fascist who just also happens to believe in gay marriage and various socialistic policies like free healthcare for all. But whatever. This article, resumes including they, them pronouns are more likely to be overlooked, new report finds. Ashton Jackson at CNBC. Let's just read a little bit. Inclusivity shouldn't just be... Should I read it in a British... Inclusivity shouldn't just be present in the workplace. It should be practiced during the hiring process as well. But unfortunately, non-binary job seekers are facing clear biases during their job search. According to a new report from Business.com, a business resource platform, over 80% of non-binary people believe that identifying as non-binary would hurt their job search. Similarly, 51% believe their gender identity has affected their workplace experience, very or somewhat negatively. So, I guess... Look, here's the thing. 10 years ago, literally 10 years ago, if you were hiring people, or if you were on Tinder or something or whatever, if you were on social media, the chances of you seeing somebody with the pronoun they, them is virtually 0%. There's almost no way that as you were hiring people, you would have seen anybody with they, them pronouns. If you were in high school 10 years ago, none of your friends would identify as non-binary. And if you said, I identify as non-binary, they would look at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? Maybe they'd be like, is that bisexual? No, it's not. But okay, people would be confused. I think a lot of people still are. So... yes, inclusivity is important, and accepting people for who they are and how they identify is important. But you have to be realistic about these things. You have to understand a few things about the person doing the hiring and the place of employment doing that's going to have these people as employees, right? For one thing, they, them, again, very new concept here. Not to say that trans people haven't been around for a while, but, 10 years ago, if you were a trans person applying for a job, you would just use the pronoun you identified with, right? You would, if you were a trans woman, you would say she on your job application. Very straightforward, right? Comparatively. I'm not saying people shouldn't, also in this video, I'm not saying people shouldn't identify or use their pronouns as they, them, whatever. But from the perspective of a business and someone hiring people, you have to think, okay, what kind of drama is this going to bring? Because look at the drama that this has brought to a lot of people's lives in universities and workplaces. Misgendering, well, I definitely don't advocate for it. I think you should totally refer to people by their pronouns that they want you to refer to them as. I think it's something that can happen on accident pretty easily, especially if you're trying to pass not as a woman or a man, but as something in so more amorphous and less specific. If you're going, how are people supposed to know what your pronouns are? Here's the thing about pronouns, okay? I always want to, when a form asks me, what's your pronouns, I want to say, and it usually doesn't let me, but I want to say, that's up to you. That's not up to me. Because my pronouns that's just shorthand for referring to people based on your observations of them, right? If I see someone walking down the street in a dress and high heels, I'm going to refer to that person as a she, right? You're making a judgment call based on what you can observe in the world. Pronouns have always been like that. They are a rough approximation, right? We don't always say the right thing. Like there's the whole gag in Monty Python where you're like old woman, and then my name's Dennis, or I'm 37, I'm not old, and then my name's Dennis, right? He got the age and the pronoun wrong because he was just making that observation. It's easy to do. It gets infinitely more complex when you introduce pronouns that aren't he or him, but are they or them. Because for one thing, that often sounds like a plural. Not all the time. There is a way to use they that sounds singular, but it often sounds plural. So it gets just confusing to our brains and what we've come to know about how you use pronouns. But misgendering can lead to like accusations of harassment, can lead to a lot of internal conflict with other employees. So I think it makes sense, even if it's wrong, that hiring people with they them pronouns, the hiring process might just skip over some of those applications because they're like, well, I don't want to deal with this shit. This is a problem that this movement faces, not in just the acceptance of trans people, but in the growing inclination of people who are not trans to identify as queer by identifying as non-binary. Again, like I don't want to fuck with your lived experience or whatever. Like that's up to you. I get that, and I'm not trying to diminish that in any way. But it seems to me that a lot of people who are just clearly just him or her are now identifying as they because it's trendy, because their friends are doing it, because it's part of this cultural zeitgeist, because it's popular, because it's on TikTok, because it makes you edgy, because it makes you it's part of this cultural moment amongst, certainly especially among young people. And good for them, right? I mean, on some level, good. You're supposed to rebel. You're supposed to be different than the generation that came before you. You're supposed to find your identity and figure out who you are. And if part of that is when you're, young and figuring your shit out, if part of that is identifying as non-binary and saying I'm not going to conform to these gender stereotypes and all that, good. That's good. You're supposed to do that when you're young. But when you're hiring people, you're also looking for people that you think you can rely on and that are dependable and that have some confidence in who they are and all these things. And that might just be one indicator that you're still fucked up trying to figure your shit out. Pardon all my French. Today I'm feeling a little bilingual. Ryan McGonigal, director of industry research at business.com and author of the report, says these statistics show just how much work there is to do around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. We clearly have more work to do on several fronts. Over the past 10 years, DEIB efforts, that's diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging, have been prioritized by many companies. However, the results of this study and past research show that teams in most industries aren't proportionately representative of the U.S. population, McGonigal tells CNBC Make It. And worse, many people, like the non-binary individuals we spoke with in our research, feel like they don't belong. Well, that's part of it, isn't it? I mean, isn't part of identifying as non-binary because you feel like you don't belong? Isn't it an effort to not belong? I mean, forgive me if I'm getting this completely backwards, but it seems to me that when you go out of your way to be some part of society that is apart from society, whether that's goth or punk rock or anarchy or non-binary, that you're doing that because you don't feel like you belong, and you want to belong to this smaller group where you feel more at home and more accepted because the wider culture doesn't accept you. Isn't that part of like that weird mixture of rebellion and acceptance? Like we want so badly to belong to something and to somebody, but we don't want to belong to the wider culture. We're rejecting it, right? When I was a rebellious youth, I spent a lot of time thinking about rejecting the wider culture. I suppose I still do on some level, right? Because there's lots to not like about the culture. There's lots to not like about capitalism. There's lots to not like about consumerism and this world we've created. Like when I go to big cities and whatnot, and I drive through these endless suburbs or past these strip malls and these concrete jungles, right? I feel very alienated. I don't like the world we've created. And so there's a certain part of me that is constantly in a process of rejecting it, right? And I am constantly rejecting our political dichotomy, and I'm not content. And I know that within like games media or media in general, that I am a piranha. Like I know that I am not accepted, and I fully embrace that. And that is sort of what you're doing when you identify as non-binary. You're rejecting the constructs of the wider culture so that you can be embraced and accepted into your niche, into this group that you feel comfortable and at home with, right? Now, part of the problem that we've seen in this dialogue, or this lack of dialogue that we have around these things, is that, you know, like goth kids didn't ever try to take over the wider culture. They rejected it and they moved on with their lives. But what we've seen with this, with the sort of radical gender studies and all this stuff, is this idea that every corporate boardroom and everywhere else and every employer and every school and everybody needs to accept how people identify, to the point of how they're referred to with pronouns, 100%, or else you're a bigot, or else you are putting people in harm's way, etc., etc. But the whole process of identifying as non-binary, of going down that road, is at least in part rejection of the culture. You are being rebellious, for lack of a better term. You are striking a new path. You can't expect to be accepted by the thing you reject. Right? The hippies didn't expect everybody just to like accept them. They were rejecting that culture. Right? So there's this friction that's created between this, you know, this new youth movement and the broader culture. But for the first time ever, the youth movement, the activists within this movement, many of whom are older and should know better, want the broader culture to just accept the rebellion wholesale, at face value, without questioning it. And if you don't, well, now, this is a complicated subject because a lot of like the hippie movement or any sort of radical social movement does have like goals in mind that are partly about accepting things that the culture didn't accept, right? So the civil rights movement was directly tied to the hippie movement, the anti-war movement, all that stuff in the 60s and 70s. And of course, part of that is equality for black people, for minorities, for gay people, for right? So there has been this trend of more acceptance for more people for a long time now, and that's really good. But accepting and fighting for equality for black people didn't mean that the broader culture ever was like, yes, we should all become hippies and live in communes, right? So where are we with this movement? This movement is so different in so many ways and yet so similar in so many ways. Kids have always rebelled. Kids have always struck a new path. Every generation, there's something like this that happens. But I admit, since I have only lived so long, I can't really speak to the lived experience of people dealing with, you know, the rebellion of the 60s and 70s. I wasn't even born yet. But to me, the impression I get now is that this movement is much more authoritarian in nature than past rebellious youth movements. You know, this movement as opposed to like the peaceniks and and all of those. This they want power now, not to reject power or to burn down systems necessarily, but to create new systems in their place immediately. And I don't know, it just, something about it really rubs me the wrong way. Because I don't mind the rebellious side. I don't mind people saying, you know what, fuck gender, that, fuck the duality of gender. Like, we don't believe in that. We believe that it's more fluid than that. I think that's fine. Great. I think sexuality is fluid also. I think people in general are not to be boxed in, right? I think we are multitudes of things. But when you say we want it all, we want things to be fluid and less definable by these old dichotomies, but we want that set in stone now. We want this to be the rules. We want rules now. We want our rules. That doesn't feel like youth rebellion anymore. That feels like a power play. And maybe, I guess it's my own rebellious side that says, fuck your rules also, and fuck your power play. Anyways, I guess I got carried away a little bit, but yeah. Here's another quote from McGonigal. Companies should have clearly outlined initiatives and timelines for improving diversity, equality, and inclusion in the workplace. On top of that, they should measure their employees' sense of belonging. Investing in these efforts can only be positive for companies and team members alike. But can it? Again, see, you want clearly defined stuff for people who don't have clearly defined identities, whose entire identity is not to be clearly defined, and yet have this idea that it must be clearly defined in every aspect of their lives, or else they are harmed in some way. That's crazy. Like, you can't expect clearly defined initiatives, rules, and expectations for people who don't have those for themselves because they're rejecting that in society. It doesn't make sense. And no, investing in these efforts can also be negative for companies, because if you start to cater to everybody's need to reject and yet belong at the same time, you're just going to create chaos. And a well-run company cannot be chaotic. As much as I do love some chaos, clearly that's not how we're going to have a functional society. I mean, just because my fucking brain is constant chaos and I skirt around life on the verge of chaos all the time doesn't mean I want the rest of society to do that also. We would live in a madhouse all the time. So that's all I have to say about that. I mean, again, I'm not trying to offend anyone here. This is my personal interpretation of what I've seen. I am the father of a teenage daughter. I see her friends and classmates, a lot of whom identify as non-binary or use they, them pronouns. I suppose that influences my opinions because I just see the same fucked up kids that I grew up with, but now they have new language and new ideas to express their fucked upness, right? Nobody's really changed. We don't suddenly live in an era where everybody's non-binary, and that hasn't actually happened. We just have new language to describe how lost we feel and how crazy it all seems. But that's nothing new. We've always, especially when we're teenagers, felt lost and crazy and like us against the world. It just takes new forms and new shapes. And it's okay. It's good. It's healthy. That is how things change. That is how things grow. Like, that has to happen. We need that. We need every generation to have new ideas and to challenge old ideas. That is good. But you don't want to just immediately embrace the power. That's bad. Don't become what you hate. So, thanks for watching. Peace.